I'm really excited about this holodeck vision. I think one of the areas that has been a bottleneck for the creation of quality XR content is the mastery of the skills for creating 3D models and 3D animations. It is inherently hard. Now, the other thing about my personal opinion on all of this, which informs and has been informed by my 30 years in the field, is that it's never been about immersive hardware for me. To me, it's always been about the power of 3D graphics as the next user interface, as the next operating system, as a more intuitive way for us to interact with information, each other, depending on what the use case is, as in, with avatars or not. So to me, it's always just been a media type. And my personal mission has been to make that media type as easy to create and consume as 2D.
Hi everyone, welcome to the AllThingsXR podcast. In today's episode, I'm joined by a true XR OG, Tony Parisi. Hi Tony, it's great to have you here.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Mujtaba. Good afternoon.
Thanks very much. So Tony, I'm sure most of our listeners know you, but can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I've been in the world of XR, 3D graphics for over 30 years. I started working in this field in the early 1990s, fresh out of college and in my first software engineering job. I moved to California and started working on a project called VRML, the Virtual Reality Markup Language, which became the first standard for 3D graphics back in the mid-90s when no one knew they needed anything like that on the internet. So we were a bit early, but I was very passionate working in this field and about this vision for 3D graphics being democratized, which will be a recurring theme throughout the 30-year career if we get into unpacking that. And I still sort of work in that field, though these days I'm mostly working on art and music, and I'm sure we'll get to that as well. But along the way, I worked on these 3D internet standards, including VRML, X3D, GLTF, which is the most current one, and a lot of people are probably familiar with that. Started a few startups, had some success in the Silicon Valley, business world. For 6 years, I ran VR and AR for Unity Technologies, a big game engine company, and left there a few years ago. Worked in a blockchain metaverse company with Neil Stevenson, of all people, one of the people who inspired my work in the first place, for a couple of years before just jumping out and getting out of tech full time and getting back to my first love, which is music, and working on mostly music and art projects right now. But still deeply interested in what's going on in the metaverse, keeping an eye on all that. I'm both terrified and excited about what's going on with AI, and especially how that relates to 3D and whatever we're going to create in the way of a holodeck, if you're familiar with that concept from Star Trek.
Yeah.
And so I'm still in it, and I'm glad to be here with you today talking about these things.
Awesome. Thanks, Tony. So, Tony, you've seen multiple waves in XR and other tech trends. What's your take on the current state of XR?
Well, as we're speaking today, it was just a few days ago that Meta announced that there would be force reduction, cost reduction in their metaverse division, which is inside Reality Labs. And if you know, Meta's got this large organization working on XR hardware, but also software, virtual worlds like Horizon Worlds. And so I'm going to imagine that a lot of that cutting that they're going to do is going to be around Horizon and some of their, software properties. I don't know what, I have no inside information on this. And I know they're going to keep working on various kinds of hardware. They're really committed there. It seems like they've put more emphasis these days on the augmented reality and mixed reality platforms and, lightweight form factor glasses like the Ray-Bans they're partnered on. And that makes a lot of sense. I mean, let's face it, Meta is a massive company and they're dealing with scale issues that a lot of us can't even appreciate. And so I'm sure they've been having shareholder pressure for a long time now on a division that has been bleeding money when it comes to Reality Labs, just buckets of money, billions. I think they've spent over 60 billion on this exercise so far is the figure I saw. So it's kind of natural that they were going to pull back from some of this and redeploy a lot of those resources toward AI, because who isn't right now? And I think a lot of people are taking that as the latest market signal that this is all dead. But, the fact is, when it comes to Meta, and I'm just going to speak to them very specifically because I think a lot of eyes are on them right now, um, that they're facing what we call a classic innovator's dilemma. They're too big to innovate themselves. They're too diffuse and focused on too many different things. A company of that size has problems with, originality and original thinking. It's just institutionalized that they can't do that as well as smaller, more nimble entities can. So that's all going on at Meta. And of course, the naysayers and doomsayers are going to say this is, the beginning of the end, or just another bad signal for XR. Nobody needs this stuff, which my personal take is that couldn't be farther from the truth. I just saw that Courtney Harding posted a little Forbes article. My pal Courtney, I think you've had her on the show, if I'm not mistaken, right? Yeah. And she also mentioned how Samsung and Google have a hardware partnership with some new wearable, and they announced it and then quietly have said nothing about it recently. So I don't know if that's a signal or they're just going to be in wait and see mode. So speaking of other large companies that will kind of experiment here, an expensive experiment, and then maybe not do anything if it doesn't take. Honestly, I think right now, more than anything, the overriding thing is probably that people are distracted with everything going on with AI, that's where most of the focus and investment is. But of course, people will keep plugging away on creating new hardware and new software and new content and new solutions in XR. The value proposition is just too compelling around, a wearable device that gives you augmented superpowers in the real world, an entertainment device like an immersive VR headset, other forms of immersion like, projections and everything else that I personally gravitate towards. I'm not a huge fan, just to get to my personal take on this, of a lot of the wearable ideas. I don't spend hours in a VR headset. Those are great experiences, but they're very specific for me and they have very specific use cases. I'm not, despite working for 6 years at Unity, I'm not really a gamer. So I'm not going to be playing immersive VR games all day long. And then when I do, it's like Beat Saber because I'm a musician. So I do things that are kind of music oriented. So that's all going on. So I personally think we'll still see slow, steady, how would I say it, halting growth in XR hardware. It'll come in waves and fits and starts, and it'll go hard for a while and then slow down. And apparently to us looking from the outside might seem like it's going away, but I don't think it's going to go away. Now, the other thing about my personal opinion on all of this, which is informs and has been informed by my 30 years in the field, is that it's never been about immersive hardware for me. To me, it's always been about the power of 3D graphics as the next user interface, as the next operating system, as a more intuitive way for us to interact with information, each other, depending on what the use case is, as in, with avatars or not. So to me, it's always just been a media type. And my personal mission has been to make that media type as easy to create and consume as 2D. And we continue to advance toward that. WebGL running in a browser, file formats like GLTF, making it easy to publish and consume that information. More and more designers being aware of how to create for 3D. 3 generations of consumers now have been brought up on science fiction, high budget movies and video games, and really understand the power of 3D without having to be convinced, right? When I started this journey personally, a lot of folks had to be convinced that 3D was going to be cool. It really was the stuff of science fiction novels mostly when I started on this. But now it's become evident that once you have the computing power behind this and it works and it's fast and it's reliable and it works, people will use it for a lot of things. Looking at products in an e-commerce site, playing video games, designing, walking through buildings you're designing that don't exist yet. I could go on about the use cases, right? So to me, it's about the power of 3D graphics, and slowly and steadily and unstoppingly, that is happening. And now, this is why I'm excited. I mentioned this about the possibilities for AI, because generative AI and 3D are finally coming together. It's really nascent. It's new. There's some great examples out there, but it's kind of at the state that let's say Midjourney was or DALL-E was 5-6 years ago. It's got some catching up to do. It's crude, though I'm seeing some really interesting early results coming out of, say, WorldGen, their marble product and a few others. So I'm pretty hopeful that with the power of AI added to this equation, there will be a lot less friction around the content creation and making worlds in 3D. And in fact, we are going to get to this kind of holodeck vision where I think something up, I speak it, I tell the computer, and in not too much time, a world shows up that I can walk through and interact with. So I firmly believe that we are on the cusp of that. I don't know whether it will be experienced mostly in immersive headsets or still on flat screens or in some new holographic display technology we can't even conceive yet, or through implants or contact lenses, no idea. But the foundation of it will be in the 3D content and the software. The device, while important to me, has never been the critical component.
I see.
And so vis-a-vis the metaverse, to me, the metaverse is the internet in 3D. So that's happening. It's not about Neil Stephenson's view in the book Snow Crash. It isn't about us being virtual avatars. I mean, why would we replace ourselves with cartoons when you and I are having a perfectly effective conversation right now on video? Now, of course, if we wanted to be, giant white rabbits or, alien species, sure, we might want to adopt a different skin for that and communicate with cartoon avatars. But to me, it's never really been about that unless there's a use case that really demands it. Some simulation where we want to take on different personas, some gaming experience where we've gone into a historical or fantasy world, and so on. So how would the pull quote version I'm going to give you, Mujtaba, is the metaverse is alive and well. It's just,
For sure.
It's not evenly distributed and it's taking its time. Yeah.
For sure. Thanks, Tony. You created VRML before most people had even seen 3D on the web. What problem were you obsessed with solving back then?
So really back then, the problem I was personally obsessed with solving was to create a way for a content creator to make and publish their 3D graphics creations. I wasn't interested personally in a specific business problem. Now, there were many, many use cases, such as, architectural walkthrough I was mentioning earlier. We've got a design of a building. I mean, these CAD systems were already in existence on PCs back in the 90s. You could create a walkthrough of a virtual space, experience it on a PC, and actually walk around in somewhat real time. If you had a computer that had a graphics card installed in it, you needed a, kind of beefy machine back then. This was pre-laptops. Laptops were very early back then. They were called portable computers. They weren't even called laptops, and they were the size of what would be today's desktop computer, much bigger than today's MacBook. And so the idea was, I could create a walkthrough like that of a new building I'm designing and share it with someone online, the way you could share recipes online on a web page, right? So that was the idea. And for me, as a software engineer, wanting to solve hard problems, it was really, to me, about that. How can we create a way to publish that data so people can experience it worldwide? It's really about sharing and collaboration. And that walkthrough is what, first use case. Another one would be, a model of a product or an object that you wanted to share with someone. So it was very much, thinking about computer-aided design kind of applications back then, but with an eye toward the idea that if I had a model of some product I wanted to buy, I could shop for it and see it in 3D. And I was thinking about that stuff in the mid-1990s when most people were not. I would definitely admit that. And it's really still kind of considered to be new and innovative in this day and age. There's still very few 3D shopping applications that are good, that can give you product spins. And, mostly they've been focused for the last 15 years around spinning sneakers around. I don't know why people can't get past sneakers, but, there's coffee makers, there's cars, there's like refrigerators, there's and some people, there's been some attempts here in the last 10, 15 years, and some of them were using like the Unity plugin. They weren't even based on open tech like VRML. Like IKEA years ago built a room configurator so you could, test out and build your kitchen. That's been in existence for over a decade, maybe 15 years now. So those were the kind of use cases I was thinking about then, as well as kind of more fantastical advertising, which was even then barely starting to be experimented with, and was certainly not the dominant business model on the open web like it became just 5 years later, the late 90s, early 2000s. But we were already thinking about that. There were banner ads were being experimented with before Flash, before all that. And we thought 3D could be a really great way to do interactive banners or interactive branded content. And lots of ad agencies have experimented with that now in the wake of WebGL being built into the browser, no friction on downloading and all that. But yeah, those are the kind of things I was thinking about. It's so funny because I think I'm in that disjoint subset of people who weren't thinking about it for gaming, weren't really caring about it for these avatar metaverse worlds that everyone is obsessed with from the science fiction books. We were inspired by that idea, but Mark Pesce, my partner in VRML, and I really were less interested in those use cases. And again, for me personally, I was thinking about it as a media type. So the problem I was trying to solve is get the 3D graphics delivered over a wire. And literally it was a wire back then. It was like a dial-up modem. It was something you put connected to your telephone line, your landline. Obviously, we've come a long way.
Yeah, exactly. And Tony, you also coined the term GLTF, and it became hugely successful. Why did this 3D standard stick, you think?
I think a lot of it's about timing. The world was not ready for what we were doing with VRML. So we were definitely early. Computing power, bandwidth to deliver this content, which is, arguably it's actually more effective for bandwidth than video content is. But that's a topic for another day and for a deep geek session. But still, broadband really helped with being able to deliver this kind of content. Consumer readiness, designer skill set. A lot more people know how to build 3D than they used to, 20 plus years ago. And so what really happened was we came around to WebGL being built into a browser. So the browser folks started realizing by 2008, 2009 that they needed to supply a way to allow freeform drawing. So they started with 2D canvas, basically give you a graphics library that you could build anything on, so you weren't restricted to buttons and just rectangular gizmos on your web page, but would give you a drawing surface. And then that quickly extended to the concept of doing it in 3D and connecting to the GPU underneath and having the browser access that. And they worked through the hard problems of WebGL from 2008, 2009 to 2012 and beyond. They're still solving those problems now. And WebGPU is sort of going to supplant that, it looks like. But as that was evolving and people were starting to build JavaScript libraries on top of WebGL, like 3JS, Babylon, and these things you're familiar with if you're a web dev, it became clear that people were recreating the content pipeline to make anything for those browsers with 3JS. They would take old different file formats, OBJ, STL, which is the 3D printing format, and they were writing their own converters and then writing their own code to read the converted models into 3JS and display them. So there was clearly a need to just come up with a standard way to present those models that would run on top of WebGL. And a handful of folks started working on that on a project they originally called ATF, for Asset Transmission Format. And I joined that effort in around 2011 when it was pretty early still. And the design goals were kind of way too modest. They were like, let's get a static 3D object we could spin around in the web page based on this file format. And while I appreciated that from an engineering standpoint, let's keep it simple. I rallied really hard. I pushed this really, really hard and said, we need animation. We need more complex scene structure. We need to have something that is going to be attractive for content creators to do real stuff, even when we first, even the first version, and pushed really hard to kind of add more features like an animation system to version 1 of GLTF. Along the way, we renamed it to GLTF, which is a name I suggested. It was originally based purely on WebGL and OpenGLES. It is now kind of rendering agnostic, so it could work on DirectX and Microsoft. Microsoft joined the party by version 2. But yeah, initially it was very much targeted toward GPU accelerated graphics, keep the format really simple. So, I joined and made it harder, but we solved some of those technical software problems. What was really good was most of the core team, Neil Trevitt and Brandon Jones from Google, and Fabrice Robinet at the time, I think he was at Motorola and moved over to Apple. They really did continue to hold the line on keeping the design really simple. So where we did draw the line is we never added any interactive behaviors. We didn't want to make it into a scripting system. A lot of things that we could have done to make it VRML-like, because that had all those features, we pulled back on and made it like really focused on making sure the assets could be read in and displayed in any browser or mobile application. And we knocked it out of the park on keeping the design goals really simple from that standpoint. So I think that's what led to its success. We kept it really simple, and we didn't get into any place where it would become difficult for somebody building a browser or who already had a graphics engine to accept it. But anybody could read it in, and it wouldn't start, making them have to make really difficult design choices. So that led to, for example, Oculus getting really interested in it. Just to tell some more personal stories, it was around 2014 or 15. I was at one of the Oculus Connect conferences. It might have been OC1, maybe OC2. And John Carmack gave a talk where he was talking about making his own little scripting language, but he was really missing having an asset format. Did anybody have any suggestions? So right after his talk, I stage rushed. I went and talked to him and said, you need to look at GLTF. And we had a call with Oculus a week later, and they said, oh my God, we were starting to work on this internally. We were going to have a 4-person team go build it or something. Never mind, we'll just join this effort, right? So this is the power of collaboration in the web. So they could have a couple of 3 engineers looking at other people's specs, maybe making some individual contributions, but they didn't have to devote a whole team to building something, because there was a virtual team across companies and across organizations contributing spec ideas, contributing code. And so that power of collaboration really got it to take off. And Oculus's endorsement of it by way of joining the project then led to Microsoft paying attention, and then Microsoft building GLTF into PowerPoint so you can view 3D models in it. And that just really started the flywheel, the dominoes effect, if you will, of companies adopting and embracing it. So the combination, I think, of that design simplicity and getting the global collaboration going by industry leaders, on top of having a great open source effort. The thing's always been open source. The thing's always been done where the spec itself has been done out in the open, not these private, what we call smoke-filled rooms where people are just like plotting on features. Really unleashed a lot of energy. And so here we are, 10, 12 years later after the first spec was published. And it is the dominant format for doing 3D on the web and mobile. And it is, arguably, and it's an international standard now through ISO, as well as a Chronos standard, which is the standards group who governs it. They do OpenGL, WebGL, a bunch of other standards. And it is a really proud accomplishment for me. It was really fulfilling the VRML vision. It took an extra 15 years, but that's the way life is. And it's just back to the metaverse discussion we were having. These technologies take a lot of time to really have their impact.
Exactly.
Heck, look at AI. Look at artificial intelligence. The first buzz around AI was in the 1970s. Only a little bit after the big first buzz around virtual reality, which the explosion of the idea was like in the late 60s was the first demo, and then it was like in the 80s when people started to really push on it, and no one wanted to do anything with AI. And here we are now, everyone wants AI, right? So it can take 50 years for some of these technologies to really take hold after the initial exposition. In the case of 3D on the web, it's 30 now, and I think it's here because of WebGL and GLTF. So that's great. Very, very proud for me. And yeah, I think it stuck for all those reasons I said: timing, good design, industry adoption. Here we are.
So, Tony, during your years as the Unity's head of AR and VR, what did you learn about what developers truly need in a platform like Unity?
Well, it's very interesting because I joined Unity in end of 2016, And they were specifically looking for someone like me who wasn't in the
Mm-hmm.
game industry. Because what was happening is a lot of non-game developers were coming to Unity. They loved the engine. It was
Yeah,
good for building for the Oculus Rift at the time. That was the dominant headset. It was just coming out of developer mode and getting into, the first consumer version. And Unity was the preferred way to build. But the developers that were coming to Unity weren't game devs for XR. They were
exactly.
making educational content. If they were doing entertainment content, they were doing cinematic storytelling. They were doing training. They were doing historical recreations, empathy pieces, on the human condition. And
Exactly.
it had very little to do with game dev. Of course, there were game devs too, making zombie shooters and that kind of stuff. But in the large, it was non-game customers. And the business teams and the product teams at Unity really only know how to speak to game developers,
Hmm.
right? Speak to game developers. So that was an interesting time and challenge, and it was very challenging. I mean, even Unity. I mentioned the innovator's dilemma when it comes to meta, but Unity was having it too because it's very hard to change your ways and your product thinking. You've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. In this case, everything looks like game development to a company
Hmm.
like Unity. So it required some real flexible changes in thinking. Obviously, internally, I mean, I was hired because they knew they had to change. And various folks within the organization at all levels, engineers, high-level execs, product marketers. There were folks who knew we needed to make change, and the thing is, it's difficult because you have existing business models, ways you price the software, feature sets that the engineers and product managers are focused on. And it was a real challenge. And a lot of that came out okay. A lot of that, has fallen by the wayside at this point, I would say. But and Unity itself as a company has ruthlessly gone back to focus on gaming primarily. But along the way and on their way, at the time I joined, it was before Unity had gone and had their public offering, their IPO. And they knew as a big growth strategy and part of the IPO, it would be important to have a business beyond gaming. So we did look at many other industry segments, industrial ones, for example, digital twins being created that you could see in XR headsets. So that gets
Exactly.
back to what I was talking about with, architectural walkthroughs, factory floor, modeling shop floors, and then doing simulations on that. Training your work staff on how to operate equipment. If it's heavy equipment and it's dangerous, there are safety and cost concerns there that XR can really help with. So Unity got really involved in supporting development of those use cases, and at times had some pretty good success coming up with business models to address that. A pricing strategy that made sense for enterprise licenses for that kind of enterprise user versus what they would call an enterprise game customer, like say Electronic Arts, who has thousands of Unity licenses or whatever the number is these days. So, interesting time in figuring out how the customers would pay, which ones would pay. You walk into an innovation lab at a large manufacturer, large automaker, let's say, and they've got internal champions. They've got whole teams with headsets on who are trying to figure out, how do I replace the physical prototype of a new car we're developing, like a thing made out of wood or clay, like a physical car model. How can I replace using that with something virtual? Because I can
Exactly.
do this stuff once the system's in place. I can do what I'm doing faster. I don't have to send things around the world as much or build things that require physical material. So this is really really exciting time. Some of the things that I would say maybe didn't work so well. The entertainment use cases outside of gaming, the whole cinematic world of this. I don't know how well that is even just taken off as a business. There are exceptions. There are, the Emmy-winning studios like Baobab, who've created some of the most incredible CG interactive VR storytelling content in the world. I don't know if that has really emerged as a medium outside of a handful of these creators, though. I was more hopeful that would be a thing. That being immersed in a story would be a better way to experience it or a different way to experience it. But that hasn't quite linked up yet. I think most of the the energy of that is going to how can we make a story in 20 seconds for a TikTok?
Yeah.
Because just easier to monetize, right? Easier, way easier and faster to create. So we'll see. Maybe someday there's the 3D immersive entertainment creation becomes one of these things. It may just be a timing issue. What else happened along the way at Unity? I got very excited coming back to this idea of brand advertising. I mean, the history of media in a way, in a big way, is the history of increasing production value, and a lot of that is storytelling is going towards selling a product, and that's advertising, right? And so I ended up changing jobs from working on those enterprise and non-game use cases broadly to moving into the ads group to see how we could take VR and AR to change advertising and change the game in advertising. Now, for Unity's advertising business, that's mostly interstitial ads on a mobile game on your phone. They're not even 3D; they're 2D. It's
Yeah.
not even 3D games; it's 2D games. And Unity has a very successful advertising infrastructure that allows their developers to monetize really well. So you're playing a game, you get to the end of a level, you now either have to pay to keep going or watch an ad, right? And that ad is typically for someone else's game. And if you go and install it, the the game developer who hosted that ad gets paid a portion of advertising revenue, and Unity gets paid a portion of that advertising revenue. And the game dev who ran the ad gets a new user. Crazy. And it's this crazy economy that works really well in mobile gaming. And so I was brought in to look at how XR could innovate there, either with deeper engagement with VR, like a new ad format in VR, or augmented reality launch from your phone. And I spent quite a bit of time on product innovation and working with product teams there on that. And so that was wild. And so, that was a company who was, again, when I started on its way to IPO, went through the IPO, trying to figure out growth and movement into new industries. And it's always a challenge. And again, they kind of circle back to what they know well now, which is gaming. And as a shareholder, I'm very happy about that. I'd like to see more innovation coming out of Unity, but maybe that'll be for another day. Or maybe someone else will come along and tackle the tooling problems that really need to be solved for the next generation of XR beyond gaming. And maybe it won't be Unity. Maybe it won't be Epic. Maybe it'll be some upstart company working on these kind of tools. We'll see.
I see. I see. Yeah, I agree. And Tony, back to hardware. Many companies right now are creating smart glasses, including Meta, Snap, Samsung, many Chinese companies. What has to improve for smart glasses to become daily wear for normal people, do you think?
Well, I think the thing that most people point to, and it would be hard to disagree with them, is that you need to have really good miniaturization. It's got to be as light as the glasses people are already wearing. I think that's why we're seeing most of the action being in audio, speech recognition, AI powering right now, right? The Meta Ray bands are audio devices; they're not visual devices. I mean, they have the camera in there, but they're not displaying anything pointing at your eyeballs. And I think until the glasses can feel like as light as these kind of glasses, I don't think we're going to have large scale adoption. I mean, I think people can likely handle a form factor that's a slight bit bigger and heavier, and definitely early adopters are doing that. So I think there's that. I think there's a form factor issue. But I honestly also think there's probably, and this is just my uninformed opinion, this is purely me and it's purely subjective. I think the real sleeper use case for doing, putting this on your head and doing that and with computer assist is audio. It is speech. It is AI. And as XR people, I think we tend to overlook that. I think we tend to orient too much on visuals and graphics. But I think the true augmentation there is these glasses helping you navigate and understand the world around you. And so the cameras are cool, for sure, because the cameras help with a bunch of stuff like image recognition and all that. I don't know if you use the Google search feature where you
Yeah.
point the camera at some plant, you want to know what it is, some tree. I do that kind of stuff all the time now, or use it for text translation in another language. So I think that's where the real power of a lot of the augmentation in glasses is going to be. Um, I think I don't even know about 3D, but information overlays in 2D can be super helpful as well. So
Mhm.
having that form factor up on your head versus on a plate of glass that you're holding up frees both hands. Gives you more, I'd say, degree of freedom because head movement is a little more natural for some of this than waving the plate of glass around. Um, so we'll see where that all lands. I don't believe personally that it's going to turn into a very, very tiny, lightweight version of the Apple Vision Pro, where it's a mixed reality device that is wearable all day long. I feel like before that happens, and this is just my gut again, and I don't know enough about material science or hardware engineering to really know where this is going to land. But I talk to people at the big companies working on this stuff, and they've always been saying to me, like for years now, it's at least a decade out before we can get the miniaturization down on some of these things. Are real hard problems to solve in the hardware and in the display materials and so on. So it may be that something like projections and different display, larger format display devices supplant some of these ideas, or take up the space of some of these ideas for immersive entertainment or gaming, or larger visual, walkthroughs and visualization of digital twins versus putting something on your face, right? So not sure. That's my take. It may end up in a different form factor, and the smart glasses really just may be your AI companion
I see, I see. Yeah, I
with a
totally
little bit
agree.
of display. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Meta's already doing some work in that field. The Snap is doing even XR on their glasses. But as you said, with AI, they can be really helpful. And Tony, my next question, everyone in tech industry is all about AI. Where do you see AI making the biggest immediate difference in XR?
I'm really excited about this holodeck vision. I think one of the areas that has been a bottleneck for the creation of quality XR content is the mastery of the skills for creating 3D models and 3D animations. It is inherently hard. Um, when people 3 or 4 years ago were getting excited about Gen AI art tools like Midjourney and their potential application for 3D, I was initially dismissive, but only because I have also spent personally over 20 years by that point trying to make the creation of 3D easier just by simple things like better product design, drag and drop, templates, all the stuff you find in Canva or PowerPoint or a Photoshop kind of tool. Just bring those into 3D tools so people aren't just sitting there in a game engine coding away like they do in Unity all day. So much of that still needs to be done. And so when I first heard this idea, well, AI will solve all of this, I'm like, it ain't going to solve that. It's not going to solve the good tool design problems. That said, the idea that I could generate 80% of what I need by prompting or talking to the computer before I start using an interactive tool to fine tune it and place it, that makes a lot of sense to me. That's just going to be a time saver. That's going to not only be a time saver. I mean, what I love about Gen AI tools, I also don't like about them because I'm a musician. We don't even have time to get into what I hate about Gen AI and music. But on visual
Yeah,
art,
we'll
since
get
I'm
to
not a
that.
visual artist, so I'm a hypocrite. I'm a hypocrite. This is like next time we do an interview, we'll talk just about music. So here's the thing. I'm a hypocrite because I'm not a visual guy. I can't really make visual art. So I love using visual tools like Midjourney and, Dolly and Sora and all that. And so what I like about the 3D side of this is I could just, create some of this stuff with a prompt. And it's really cool because sometimes it's not what I wanted and I
Mhm.
get
Yeah, exactly.
surprised. And I really like that. that's kind of almost like in the real world of visual arts, a painter, good painters, and my wife's a painter and sculptor. That's her sculpture up on the wall behind me, that unicorn.
My wife
Um,
too.
they work with them. Yeah. Oh, nice. They work with the material and they let the material speak to them. Right. So when I slop paint on a canvas as an artist, a visual artist, I might like that thing and I wasn't planning on it. And then I might run with it and bring that into the work, especially abstract painters, but even ones that are, working on more photorealistic and representative art. In Marina's case, she sculpts, but she lets, and that's a photorealistic, well, hyper realistic unicorn actual size. But I mean, it's the size of a horse's head. It's horse anatomy, right? But she still lets the nature of the wire she uses as her medium, chicken wire in this case, industrial wire, speak to her on how she layers it, what the ultimate form ends up looking like, how the light passes through it. And so similarly, getting surprised by the output of an AI tool sometimes leads to a new kind of art. And it really is all in the sort of hands of the artist. So as to what to do with it. So in the case of 3D, I think we'll see that same thing. We'll see surprises, we'll see hallucinations that we like, and we'll go with them. So it's not just about the time saver aspect. It is about unleashing forms of creativity we might not have had at our disposal before that, because we were just focused on, okay, I want to put that thing there, I want to drag it, I want to move it, I want to paint a texture on it. And so now there'll be a little bit more, I think, randomness and wackiness in the output of the art. I still think it all needs to be created by an actual artist with intent. And that's the big screaming debate that's happening on Twitter and all the social media right now. Is it really art?
Yeah,
And that is an
exactly.
eternal question, right? So I am super excited, back to your question, about the possibilities for the holodeck. I, as a non-skilled 3D artist, could create infinite worlds by prompting them into existence. I will probably always try to work with an art director who has some skill, who knows how to design good space. I would like to think I would still also, if budget permitting, then employ professional artists to help me with aspects of any content I create when I can. But if I am someone who wants to just build a world and walk into it so I can hang out with my friends, I shouldn't have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars of content creation time to do that. So it is this fine tension between these ideas and these needs. But that's what excites me the most about what's going to unlock XR in the next few years. Back to your, the main thread of your question, and ethics and, philosophical questions about art aside, there has been a bottleneck on just the sheer amount of 3D we've been able to create and the types of creators who have access to be able to do it. It's been locked in game engines and pro modeling tools. So it needs to get democratized more fully, and AI is a big component of that. I think simpler drag and drop tools, back to what I was saying earlier, very key and critical. I think web distribution, WebXR and WebGL and GLTF are also critical. It can't always be about build an app in a game engine, package it, submit it to an app store, wait to get it approved, pray that Meta approves it or Apple approves it,
Yeah.
or Google approves it. Just publish it and see what happens. So I think those two things, the democratization and the AI, acceleration of creation, I think are going to fundamentally impact the speed with which XR is going to roll out in the coming next iterations. None of those are going to solve any hardware issues we're up against, but they absolutely are going to help with the creation of quality experiences, in my opinion.
Awesome, awesome. And Tony, you are also very active on Web3. What parts of Web3 do you think are actually useful for XR?
Well, so I was excited about Web3 because of the creator economy aspects of it. The Web2 creator economy was all about a lot of people creating a lot of stuff, the platforms making most of the money,
Yeah.
and then giving crumbs to the creators and artists, tiny amount of the revenue. The promise of Web3 for creators was that they would be able to monetize their creations in a way that is in keeping with the value they're making and not give it over to some platform or gatekeeper. That is what fueled a lot of the NFT run. That's definitely what drove musicians in the hundreds to go look at this, which is how I docked in with it. Going back to 2001, 2002, I started really thinking about with these music projects I knew I was going to launch soon. I was spending money to make my records. Was I also going to spend a bunch of money to try to get listeners on Spotify just so then I don't make any
Mm-hmm.
money because they don't pay. None of the streamers pay. So there's a lot of musicians who went into that. So what drove a lot of artists in the creator economy, whether they're 2D or 3D, visual creators or musicians, was the promise that they could get paid appropriately for what they were making and not just be part of a click factory, click labor. And so that has come and gone. The NFT craze was replaced by a meme coin craze a couple of years ago, and most of the money that might have
Yeah.
gone to NFTs via collectors went to meme coin speculation. Sadly, that has now kind of fizzled out. But what we don't know, and it seems like every once in a while there seems to be some glimmer that NFTs might come back or some digital collectibles that don't have the NFT name because everyone's afraid of those. They're afraid they're scams, right? So yeah, that's what drew me to it. And I still think there's the promise there of a monetizable creator economy. And I think it necessarily needs to be built on decentralized blockchain tech, AKA Web3. Now, there's so much ugly business around Web3. There's so much up and down on crypto. There's way too much volatility on the currencies. There's way too many scams going on, both in NFTs and in these meme coins. And so people are right to be afraid and cautious about a lot of this stuff, which is unfortunate. It does seem to attract a lot of unsavory types of folks. But when you look back at the early internet, that's what, we had the phishing attacks and all the scam emails. Those haven't gone away. We have better tools for detecting those. So even the internet came with a lot of that kind of
Yeah.
problematic behavior 20 plus years ago. So I don't know, maybe it will just all get baked into the cake in the next round. People will start collecting NFTs sensibly. They will pay for art digitally. They will pay for XR creations. They will pay to maybe get a creator token to support an artist. And then that creator token might be the thing that unlocks access to a virtual world someone makes. If you separate the enabling tech, as in Ethereum blockchain or layer twos like Base or any of the other layer twos on top, Zora or whatever, I've already forgot, I'm forgetting half the coins, that used to be sitting on Ethereum blockchains or Ethereum compatible virtual machines. It's already 2 years and I've just sort of forgotten. Or SocialFi was a thing for a while where there were decentralized social networks, but they kind of all got twisted around onto a coin you needed. So if people can sort that out, make the technology seamless, allay people's fears about scamming, maybe do a bridged Web 2, Web 3 crossover with, custodial wallets like, Privy Wallet, which got bought by Stripe. So you make it so ad hoc wallet is created. Grandma doesn't need to know what a wallet is in order to, enjoy a piece of content. Then, those things come together in the next few years. Blockchain makes a comeback as AI and Web3 and XR are rolling along. And I think you'll see that would still be the best bet for the economic foundation of an open metaverse versus app stores versus these large platforms taking a massive cut. But we'll see. We'll see. Maybe people's appetite for the Wild West and the risk aspect still won't be there, and they'd rather just have Meta tell them what's good and what's not, and put up with the fact that they're not seeing all the good stuff they could be seeing because someone in an app store somewhere decided what was good.
Exactly.
They claim to be arbiters of safety, Or in the case of XR, oh, well, we played this game and the frame rate wasn't good enough or whatever, but they can't help it. They end up being tastemakers as well.
Yeah.
Right. And it's the same on the streaming services. They're tastemakers when it comes to streaming music. There's only you never hear certain kinds of music because the algorithm doesn't give it to you. Right. So I'd love to see a world where we get past those Web 2 platform locks. And I see blockchain as the force that could make that happen. We'll see.
Yeah, I hope so. And Tony, as of my last question, looking ahead 3 to 5 years, what's your pragmatic prediction for the everyday XR experience, and what are you personally most excited about to build or support?
I want to walk in to a home theater version of the Sphere in Vegas, which,
Mm-hmm.
by the way, my son is halfway through a master's program in graduate school at UC Santa Barbara, and he's working on exactly this.
Awesome.
They have a dome there. They've had there 15 years. It's called the Alisphere. A home theater version of that. So it doesn't have to be 10 meters high, right? That is an immersive visual and audio device, platform, ecosystem, system in your house. So beyond Dolby Atmos for your audio. So some display walls, something holographic like that, into which I can do my holodeck stuff. I can walk up to my Alexa or my Siri or whatever, and no, Siri, not you. My phone wants to talk to me now. Cancel. I can walk up to it and say, I want to visit late 19th century London
Mm-hmm.
and see the soot in the air and smell the smoke, but see the excitement around Christmas time, like I'm in A Christmas Carol by George Dickens. Is that his name? Yeah. And, interact, be in my own Dickens fair. Charles Dickens. Why did I say George? And be in my own Dickens fair at home. And, maybe my friends can come and join me too. So for me, and in 5 years, I don't know if the home system will quite be there. I think we'll see bits and pieces of it. I think there'll be some XR device where you can do that holodeck kind of stuff. Just talk to it and have this happen. Someone's got to build that. The bits and pieces are lying around right now.
For sure.
I think in 5 years, the Gen 3D will be far enough along in 5 years. It might cost you a few compute cycles. It might be a few $100s to make that thing in US dollars, just paying for the compute. But pragmatically, which is the way you asked the question, I could see a first version of that hitting a home.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's exciting me. That's what's getting me up looking at tech anymore. Otherwise, I just go to the piano and start playing right now. So that's the tech I'm excited about.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, Tony, it was an honor having you on the All Things XR podcast. Thank you very, very much.
Oh, the honor is mine. The pleasure is mine, Maj. I'd love to do it again. Thanks for the time. This was great. Have a great one.
Thanks very much, Tony.